Hi, everyone. Welcome to this IELTS reading lesson on identifying writers' claims. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you're ready to get started. So we're going to look at this question type, which is an identifying type of question because you'll have to identify certain information. And you might be familiar with the identifying information question type, which is very similar and also equally challenging. This is one of the more difficult question types in the IELTS exam, and students usually hate it because there's a lot of reading involved in finding the correct answer. But don't worry, today we're going to talk all about it. I'll give you some helpful strategies, some great tips and tricks, and I know that you'll be ready to confront this question type on the exam. All right, so the first thing to keep in mind is if you think about the identifying information question type, it's a bit similar because you have to answer true, false, and not given. In this case, we're looking at answers that are yes, no, and not given. So we still have this pesky not given that sometimes confuses us. But like I said, don't worry about that right now. An important difference between this question type and the identifying information question type is here we are going to look at statements that either agree, disagree, or have no relevance to the views of the writer in the reading passage. So here we're going to be looking at opinions and views of the writer. However, they're not going to be explicitly stated. So we'll have to do some critical thinking to see if these statements here would match up with what the writer has stated. It's extremely important that you don't call on any type of outside knowledge for this question type. So for example, if you are an expert at the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, which is pretty interesting, but if you are an expert in this subject, you must not call upon your expertise or that outside knowledge because we have to look at only this passage. And there's enough as it is to go through, so don't think about anything that is not in this passage. So like I said, there's a lot of reading that could potentially sidetrack students who are faced with this question type, but we're going to use the scanning and the skimming techniques in order to read only what is necessary to answer our questions. And then we're going to look at our critical thinking skills to answer these questions. Before we get started with our step-by-step guide, I just want to give you a couple of examples on the yes, no, and not given answers. I think we need to be familiar with what these answers look like and when to use them. And this way we'll be more confident throughout our step-by-step example. Okay, let's first look at a brief example so I can show you the differences between yes, no, and not given in action. Let's take a look at number 5. Now, in our example, we will read the question, underline the keyword, scan, and then skim. So we'll do the same thing here. If one partner in a marriage smokes, the other is likely to take up smoking. So we see partner and marriage, smokes, and then likely and smoking, I think, are excellent keywords. Also, as a side note, take up is an excellent phrasal verb. You'll see a lot of phrasal verbs in the IELTS exam. So another way to say take up could be start, which we might see in the passage. So we might see synonyms as well. So this is the sentence we're looking at. Here is the passage. We're going to scan for this information. So when I start scanning, immediately something that jumps out at me is married couple. So I'm looking at marriage, and you see how this is a different way to say marriage. It's married couple. In any case, I know that I am looking at two partners. So I'm going to go ahead and scan and skim in this area. So I see partner again, non-smoker. All right, I'm going to skim. So in the case of a married couple, where one partner is a smoker and one a non-smoker, the latter, so the non-smoker, is believed to have a 30% higher risk of death from heart disease because of passive smoking. The information is not explicitly stated. So it does say that the latter, the non-smoker, has a higher risk of death from heart disease, but it doesn't state anything about taking up smoking. So a lot of students, just based on this, would answer no because the information is not included. However, no is if there is information that contradicts this statement. And there is nothing in this passage that says, if one partner in a marriage smokes, the other is unlikely to take up smoking. Nothing here alludes to that, and nothing here confirms it. And so this would be a classic case of not given. The information is simply not in the passage, so you would write not given and move on. Okay, let's go ahead and look at number 6 now. And it says, teenagers whose parents smoke are at a risk of getting lung cancer at some at some time during their lives. I said at some point because I'm thinking of different synonyms and different ways to say sometime. So some point might be in the passage. In any case, it's a good synonym. Okay, so we have read this. Our keywords are teenagers, parents, smoke, risk, and lung cancer. And so again, I would simply scan my passage for this information. And I already come across at this area here, because remember, this question type features questions that come more or less in order, usually. So it's a good idea to start with the first sentence and to continue working your way down to find your answers. And so I see here, it has been calculated that 17% of cases of lung cancer can be attributed to high levels of exposure to secondhand smoke during childhood and adolescence. All right, so this is the area that I need to be looking at. And it doesn't necessarily talk about parents, and it doesn't talk about teenagers. It talks about childhood and adolescence, which is fine. This is similar enough, but it doesn't talk about parents. And this would cause a lot of students to write no or not given because it's not specific enough. But this is where our critical thinking skills come in. So the sentence doesn't explicitly mention teenagers. It can be inferred that teenagers whose parents smoke are at risk of getting lung cancer at some time or at some point during their lives, because the statistic here of 17% mentions exposure to secondhand tobacco smoke during childhood and adolescence. So the question statement is also pretty vague in that it doesn't give you a definite time frame, and it states only that teenagers are at risk. It only says this. It is not specific of the time, and therefore this statement coupled with this information makes this inferable, and therefore we would choose yes, because this would go in line, this statement would go right in line with what the writer has written. And we have the statistic to also back it up. And so number 6 would definitely be yes, although a lot of people would put not given. Okay, so we've looked at an example of yes, we've looked at an example of not given. Now we're going to look at no. So I've cleared our screen to just give us a fresh slate. And let's look at number 4. So we see 30% of deaths in the United States are caused by smoking-related diseases. Now, we have our keywords, and already in my text, I see smoking, 30%, and deaths. So these keywords have led me to this area of the text. Now I'm going to skim, and it says smoking, it is believed, is responsible for 30% of all deaths from cancer and clearly represents the most important preventable cause of cancer in countries like the United States today. So our answer is confined to this area. Now you see all deaths, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the next slide. For all deaths, this is a very absolute word, and a lot of students would see this and immediately think yes, because this is talking about 30% of deaths, and this is talking about 30% of all deaths. However, you must look at this very important word, from cancer. So it's 30% of all deaths from cancer. This is just 30% of deaths in the United States. And the writer is saying smoking is responsible for 30% of all deaths from cancer. but not necessarily 30% of deaths in the United States. So this would be no, because it contradicts, this statement contradicts the information in the passage and the writer's views and what the writer claims. So therefore, that is no. It's very tricky, and the IELTS exam put this word all in here on purpose to trick you. And they want to make sure that you can comprehend the information and use your critical thinking skills to the best of your ability. All right, so we've looked at an example of yes, no, and not given. Now I will show you how we're going to approach our guide, and then we'll go ahead with our passage. Okay, so first thing first, we're going to read the first statement. Then we're going to scan and answer our first question if we can. This is a bit different than the other question types, and you'll have to remember that these answers are very, very likely to come in order. So if you start looking for information in the text, starting with the very first statement, you are more likely to provide yourself with a more solid path towards finding the correct answers in less time. So you want to be prepared to look at this in order. And so when you read your first statement, you're going to pull out keywords. We'll do this together. Pull out these keywords just like we did in our previous example. And this is going to help you identify and scan for the information in the text. Once we do that, we are going to use our trusty scan technique. So look for these words. Then if you look here at number 3, we're going to skim read as necessary. And then we're going to go ahead and answer our question. So it's always good to do with the first statement so you have a good idea and a good benchmark for where to find your answers in the passage. Then you can just continue reading the rest of your statements, underlining your keywords, and then scanning for those words in the passage as well, and then answering. However, it's really important that you pay attention to absolute words. And we just saw all, for example, in one of our examples before. These absolute words will trick you. So if you see something that has all in its statement, it might be harder to prove or it might be harder to disprove. These are just like little alerts that should go off in your mind when you read them. So please be aware of that. This question type, also multiple choice question type, features these pesky absolute words. Okay, and so once we've scanned for our keywords, we're going to just skim read as necessary, just like we did in our previous example. You need to have a good idea of what the text is saying because you have to know if these go along with what the writer has said or if it contradicts what the writer has said. You need to have a good idea of what the passage and what the writer is saying because you need to know if the information in the passage will contradict your statements or if they will be similar to your statements or if they will just not have anything to do with your statements and you'll have to answer not given. Now, as you answer each statement, and once you find the answer in the passage, it's a really nice idea to make little notes, like a little X or perhaps a little star or a dot as to where you found the information, because if you come across a difficult statement, you can always skip it, move on to the next one, and then when you have time to check, always look for those gaps in between your symbols, because since these answers are likely to come in order, you might find your answer in between two of your other answers. So always keep that in mind, and please don't freak out if you see a very difficult question. Again, this question type will have you reading a lot, and one of those tricks is just to eat away at your time, but we are not going to let that happen today. We're going to stick with these guides, our scanning, our skimming techniques, and we're going to get to work. Okay, step 1, we're going to read the first question. Now, for simplicity and just because we're doing this example all together step by step, we're going to read all of the questions today. In the exam, it might be a good idea for you to read the first one and then go straight into your passage. And we will complete the first answer together first. However, right now, I just want to go over all keywords just because it's the best way to organize it. As you read the first question, you're going to underline any keywords that you think will help you identify the information in the text. Okay, and so we're also going to look at a few potential synonyms for most verbs and some of the adjectives. Okay, so let's look at number 22. Alien civilizations may be able to help the human race to overcome serious problems. So I see alien civilizations. The human race is very specific, and I think the fact that they can overcome serious problems is an important keyword. Now remember, these are the words we're just going to scan for. Then we'll have to skim for serious problems, may be able to help. That's something that we'll have to understand when we skim for the general idea. For now, we're just looking at these keywords. And I'm already going to think of another way that this can be said because, if you remember, this information is not going to be explicitly stated in the text. It's going to be stated in a different way. Perhaps alien civilizations may be able to assist, maybe another word for help, assist the human population, perhaps not race, to conquer serious difficulties, okay? So I'm already thinking of some verbs. I would say assist instead of help, population, or conquer. Okay, number 23. The Americans and Australians have cooperated on joint research projects. So I would say here, Americans, Australians, cooperated, and projects. These are good keywords. And then for synonyms, perhaps instead of cooperated, you could say work together. So Americans and Australians have worked together on joint research projects. All right, number 24. So far, SETI scientists have picked up radio signals from several stars. In this case, I would say SETI, as it's very specific, radio signals and stars. Again, several and scientists, this is something that we'll look for when we skim. And so for synonyms, another way to say so far could be up until this point or until now, for example. That would be good. And number 25, the NASA project attracted criticism from some members of Congress. Here I would underline NASA, criticism, Congress. Also, keep in mind, you have some, it is an absolute word, so you're going to have to pay attention to that. And for synonyms, I would say the NASA project, instead of attracted, maybe drew or garnered criticism, okay? And then number 26, if a signal from outer space is received, it will be important to respond promptly. So keywords here, I would say signal, outer space, respond would also be a good word to look for, and promptly. For a synonym, instead of signal, perhaps you could say if a message from outer space is received, it will be crucial instead of important, to respond quickly instead of promptly. Now keep in mind, for these synonyms, you can very obviously combine it with your first step. And you don't have to write out the synonyms. You don't have to really think too much about it. It's just a helpful way to improve your vocabulary and also prepare you for the passage, because you're probably not going to see these exact words. So it's good to just read the questions and think of all these possible options. All right, good job. I will clear our screen and we'll show our keywords, which is exactly what we looked at together. So we see the keywords, we see our synonyms. Excellent. Let's move on to step 2. And here we are, step 2, scan for the first answer. So we're going to remind ourselves of our first question in just a little bit. And after we do that, we're going to take a look at the passage and see if we can find the first answer and set up a benchmark for the rest of our answers, because it's sequential order. So once we find the first answer, we'll be in a very good spot to scan and find the other answers. And this is something that most students don't do. That's why they're reading everywhere in this passage and it's eating up a lot of time. So don't fall prey to that. We're going to fix up that nasty habit and scan in order. Also, we'll have to pay attention to our synonyms and remember that the words used in these statements are most likely not going to appear directly in the passage. Of course, that would be far too easy. So let's just look at number 1. And just to remind you, we're going to have to write yes, no, or not given. And again, our keywords were alien, human race, and overcome. So alien civilizations may be able to help the human race to overcome serious problems. All right, so I'm just going to scroll down a bit to see if we can find these keywords. And now this wasn't a keyword, but it is a good synonym for human race, civilization. So this is a very similar word. And we're in the beginning of the text, so I know we're going to be talking about this SETI. And while I don't see alien right now, I keep seeing this word civilization and also older civilization. And so if I skim just to get a better understanding, I would see the mere existence of such a civilization, so a civilization that would be in our galaxy or outside of Earth, so it's sort of implied that we're talking about aliens or extraterrestrial creatures. So the mere existence of these creatures and such a civilization will tell us that long-term survival is possible and gives us some cause for optimism. It is even possible that the older civilization may pass on the benefits of their experience in dealing with threats to survival, such as nuclear war, global pollution, and other threats we haven't yet discovered. Okay, so this area is definitely the correct area. It's very difficult because alien was not explicitly mentioned, but a different civilization and SETI and extraterrestrial was all mentioned in this paragraph. So this is the right place to be. Notice how it doesn't explicitly say problems. And I wasn't expecting it to say problems. It gives you examples. So it says nuclear war, global pollution, and other threats. These are all examples of serious problems. You see what I mean? It's not explicitly stated, but with a good scanning and skimming technique, you can find this information. Okay, we just need to understand if the writer would agree with this statement based on what is written here. And I would say that the writer would agree because it says it is possible. So it is possible. Here it is may. So this is very similar. Possible, may. The writer isn't saying it's a certainty. The writer is saying it's possible. And this statement says may. Therefore, it is possible that older civilizations may pass on these benefits. In other words, it's possible that alien civilizations may be able to help the human race to overcome serious problems like nuclear war, global pollution, and other threats. So in this case, with a bit of skim reading and scanning, I would definitely say yes. So I will clear our screen and let's go ahead and show this answer. And yes, exactly. So this answer is yes. We've even blocked off the area that we looked at. Just be aware that scanning brought us to this area. And now that we know number 1 is here, we can use it as a benchmark. We don't even have to read this information up above, and we can continue going downwards. Okay, so we're going to just read the remaining statements. We're going to scan the remaining parts of the passage and answering as we go on. If we need to, we can make marks in the passage, but since we'll be doing it together, I doubt we'll be skipping any questions. Okay, let's scroll on down. We already have yes for number 22. I'll write that in all caps, just like the exam, because I like to write in capital letters for the exam to make sure everything is precise and clear. Okay, now just to remind ourselves, we have the Americans, the Australians, cooperated, and projects. So I'll scroll down to where we found our first answer, which was right here. And I'm going to scan for American and Australian. So I'm not coming across anything yet. Don't worry, it's a long passage, so we have some time and we still have some options. Okay, but I did find Australian. So we see Australian. I'm looking for Americans. And right now, I see it with US Congress. So you see how it's a little bit difficult. US Congress is giving me an idea that perhaps information about Americans is in this section. However, we also see American here with American operated telescopes. So I'm going to give this a quick skim read. And I see so far there have been a number of searches by various groups around the world, including Australian searches. Until now, there have not been any detections from the few hundred stars. The scale of the searches has increased dramatically when the US Congress voted NASA. This is also just interesting information, but it's not that useful because I'm looking to see if they have cooperated on joint research projects. So I'm going to continue. And so it takes me to the end of this paragraph here, and all I know is that there are American-operated telescopes. Australia has its own efforts, but there isn't anything telling me that they've cooperated on joint research projects. And I know that this is the correct area. And again, nothing really contradicts the fact that they have cooperated on joint research projects. There isn't anything in this paragraph that says they are enemies or that they don't work together. So in this case, since I can't prove it and I also can't contradict it, I would go ahead and say not given for number 23. So I will write out not given. Okay, I will clear our screen and we'll go down to number 24. Our keywords were SETI, radio signals, and stars. So far, SETI scientists have picked up radio signals from several stars. I'm going to keep looking around here because number 24 could be in this area as well. And interestingly, I don't see SETI, but I do see one of my synonyms until now. So in the previous step, we looked at different ways to say so far and up until this point or until now. These are excellent synonyms. So perhaps this could be a clue. I'm just going to go ahead and skim some more. And it says, until now, there have not been any detections from the few hundred stars which have been searched. I don't think we could have asked for a more straightforward statement. This is directly contradicting number 24. So far, SETI scientists have picked up radio signals from several stars. This is saying there have not been any detections from the few hundred stars. And so this is very clear. This would definitely be no. And remember, you don't want to write false, true. You want to write yes or no. And of course, not given. So let's clear our screen. All right, we are more than halfway done. Let's go to number 25 and just refresh our memories with our key words. We had NASA, criticism, Congress, and of course this absolute word some, which is something we'll have to keep in mind. So again, I'm going to stick right around here because I just found the answer right there to number 24. So I'm going to continue on searching for these keywords, and I already see NASA and US Congress. So let's go ahead and start skimming. It says the scale of the searches has increased dramatically since 1992 when the US Congress voted NASA $10 million per year for 10 years to conduct a thorough search for extraterrestrial life. And then it just gives me information about the project, but I don't really need to know the details of the project, so I'm not going to waste my time really reading that. This information doesn't really suggest that US Congress provided criticism towards NASA, and the fact that they voted $10 million per year for 10 years doesn't raise any alarms to me. It seems very neutral, and so I would go ahead and write not given, just because nothing can contradict and nothing can really confirm this information. However, I will say that some test takers might say, oh, well, since US Congress voted 10 million per year for 10 years, they must be in favor. And for some students, this would make this number 25 no, since the passage seems to imply that Congress is in favor of NASA. But then again, we don't want to use this outside knowledge. We don't know if $10 million per year for 10 years is a lot for US Congress, is not enough. Nothing is stated in this text, and we do not want to use outside knowledge. Don't even think about that. The fact that criticism is not included here and nothing contradicts that information, let's just stick with not given. Okay, so clear our screen for one last time, and we're going to move our way down because we found our answer not given right around here. So let's just make sure we can see everything on the screen. And to remind you of our keywords for number 26, we had signal, outer space, respond, and promptly. And so let's scan for those words in our text. And I don't see respond, but I do keep seeing reply and reply and reply. So this paragraph E might be a good place to start. Also, the fact that we see sort of an absolute word here, everybody, so this is very general, kind of calls my attention to this sentence. So I'm going to start skimming. Everybody agrees that we should not reply immediately. And so I should read the sentence above here. There is considerable debate over how we should react if we detect a signal from an alien civilization. Okay, so everybody agrees that we should not reply immediately, but I want to know, again, what does the writer claim? The writer is claiming that everybody agrees, but I still want to know about the writer's claim. So I'm going to keep reading and skimming here. Okay, and so there's a question, will the human race face culture shock? Luckily, there is no urgency. So the writer says, luckily, there is no urgency. This gives you an idea of the view. The stars are being searched are light years away. It's not important then if there's a delay of a few years or decades while the human race debates the question of whether to reply and perhaps carefully drafts a reply. All right, so this first sentence, first and second sentences, and this last sentence give us a lot of information. Would the writer agree with this? If a signal from outer space is received, it will be important to respond promptly. I don't think the writer would agree with this, especially based on the last sentence. The writer says it's not important. If there's a delay, it's fine. And even here, everybody agrees that we should not reply. And so the writer is going along with this. And so in this case, I would say definitely no. This information in E contradicts the statement of number 26. Okay, so let's clear our screen for the last time. And just to review, we had yes, not given, no, not given, and no. So only one yes, two not givens, which are quite tricky, and two no's, which directly contradicted the information. Let's go ahead and check our answers. And they're all green, they're all correct. And here you can also see where we found all of our information. Notice that they did pretty much come in order. There was just a little tricky question here. Number 23 featured some information in the beginning and some information at the end. But since it was not given, those are trickier, and so you can't really find the information of not given in the text. We've just shown you our reasoning. So for the most part, everything came in order. Excellent job. You see how we didn't waste any time reading things that we didn't have to read. We just scanned, we skimmed, and we finished our question type. And now we're going to finish this lesson with a few recaps and do's and don'ts for this question type. Okay, let's close off our lesson with some do's and don'ts. First off, we want to start from the first statement. Underline your keywords and scan for the first statement. We saw this today. It really saved us on time. We scanned, we found where we were, and then we continued on with our questions. So there's no need to read all over the passage, hoping to find an answer maybe out of order. No, rest assured in the fact that answers will most likely come in order. They usually come in order. This question type is famous for the fact they come in order, so use it to your advantage. Also, remember the difference between no and not given. If you get confused, go ahead and watch our example in the beginning of this lesson. but no basically contradicts information in the passage, and not given doesn't have anything to do with the information in the passage. They're not directly related, nothing contradicts or proves those statements. Also, make marks in your passage about where you found the answers. We didn't do this today because we worked together and we didn't have to skip any options. But if you make marks, little dots or little stars, and perhaps a question that you've skipped is in the middle of these two symbols, you'll know exactly where to return to when you have extra time, and you can go ahead and check your answers. Don't be afraid to skip a difficult question and move on if you have to. You don't want to waste your time, so always focus on your easy questions because you want to get those points, and then come back to the difficult questions later using this handy symbol system. And of course, write only yes, no, and not given. You don't want to be confused with true and false. That's a different question type. And lastly, don't read the entire passage first. I think this example today has shown you just how important scanning and reading in an intelligent way can really save you on time and make things a lot simpler. Also, don't forget to scan for your keywords and do not confuse no and not given. There's so much critical thinking that goes into these questions, and you don't want to make a silly error by writing the wrong answer. All right, so that's it for our identifying writers' views or claims lesson. It's been quite an interesting journey, and I thank you for following along with me. I hope you'll practice more, and I hope that you'll feel confident using these skills in your test-taking experience with IELTS. And if you'd like to practice more, please visit us at www.bestmytest.com/IELTS. Again, that's www.bestmytest.com/IELTS. Thanks. Have a lovely studying session. I'll see you for the next lesson.